The room is quiet in the way only formal hearings can be, where every movement feels recorded before anyone speaks. Microphones rest inches from nameplates, water glasses untouched, folders squared neatly in front of each lawmaker. Kash Patel sits at the witness table, shoulders still, hands folded, oath already administered. Behind him, staffers whisper in low tones, passing notes that will never be heard on the record. Across the dais, senators review highlighted pages, some marked with tabs that suggest careful preparation. No one appears hurried, yet the atmosphere carries a restrained intensity, shaped by weeks of anticipation. This is not a speech or a rally. It is oversight, deliberate and procedural. Questions have been drafted, reviewed, and quietly coordinated among members who intend to examine prior statements about the Bureau, its independence, and its handling of sensitive records. Some lawmakers lean back with pens resting between fingers. Others glance toward aides for final confirmation before speaking. Patel watches without expression, occasionally nodding as introductory remarks outline the purpose of the session. The chair reminds everyone that testimony today is under oath, subject to the permanent congressional record. Cameras remain fixed, red lights glowing steadily, capturing every pause and breath. There is no confrontation yet, only a methodical introduction to why this testimony matters. Senators reference previous interviews, public comments, and unresolved questions about document handling that will guide their inquiry. The calm feels intentional, as though the room is preparing for something more pointed to follow shortly after formalities conclude and questioning begins in measured turns across the table toward Patel waiting silently for the first direct challenge to arrive from the prepared lawmakers seated before him today. Here, the first questions arrive without raised voices or theatrical pauses. They are read carefully from prepared notes, each one grounded in prior statements Patel has made about the Bureau and its responsibilities. A senator begins by asking him to clarify remarks he delivered in earlier interviews regarding the independence of federal investigations. Another follows by referencing public comments about how sensitive records are maintained and who ultimately bears responsibility for their preservation. The tone remains formal, but the intent becomes clearer with each exchange. Lawmakers are not asking broad philosophical questions. They are narrowing the focus toward accountability and consistency. Patel answers deliberately, often choosing precise language that leaves little room for interpretation. He acknowledges certain remarks while reframing others, emphasizing context and intent rather than concession. Pens move quickly across legal pads as senators track his wording. A member of the committee leans forward to ask whether he stands by previous claims about internal procedures, citing dates and phrasing that suggest careful review. Patel nods, then pauses, offering responses that sound measured rather than spontaneous. What emerges is not confrontation, but pressure built through specificity. Senators refer to earlier appearances, to statements on record, to expectations of transparency that accompany the office he represents. The questions form a pattern, establish what was said, confirm whether it still stands, and clarify how those positions relate to document handling and institutional responsibility. Patel maintains composure, but the rhythm of questioning tightens. Each answer seems to invite a follow-up, each clarification opening space for a more focused inquiry. The room remains calm, yet the direction is unmistakable. Lawmakers are steadily guiding the discussion from general principles toward the mechanics of records, statements, and the accountability that connects them under oath today. As questioning continues, the focus shifts from general accountability to a narrower topic that has drawn sustained attention in prior sessions. Lawmakers begin referencing materials connected to the handling of records related to the Epstein investigation, noting public interest in what has been released and what has not. The change in subject is subtle, introduced through a request for clarification about how sensitive files are cataloged, reviewed, and approved for disclosure. Patel listens closely, nodding as the senator frames the issue in procedural terms rather than accusations. A member of the committee asks whether there are established steps that determine when documents tied to high-profile cases become accessible to oversight bodies. Patel responds by describing internal review processes, emphasizing that certain materials require layered authorization before they can be shared. The explanation is technical, focused on procedure, yet it invites further inquiry. Another senator references earlier remarks made outside this hearing about transparency, asking how those commitments align with the limitations Patel is now describing. The discussion turns toward why some documents connected to the case remain out of public view. Patel answers carefully, noting privacy concerns, legal boundaries, and ongoing considerations that restrict disclosure. Pens pause briefly as senators absorb his wording. There is no interruption, only a steady sequence of questions that circle the same point from different angles. What becomes noticeable is the guarded precision of Patel's replies. He does not refuse outright, but he rarely expands beyond what is asked. Each response sounds technically complete while leaving space for interpretation. The hearing room remains composed, yet the attention sharpens as lawmakers begin pressing on the gap between stated commitments to transparency and the cautious boundaries Patel continues to outline under oath before the committee. The questioning becomes more deliberate, with senators narrowing their language to remove any room for broad interpretation. Instead of asking about policies, they begin asking about specific exchanges, specific acknowledgments, and whether certain information was ever directly addressed. One senator reads a prior statement into the record and asks Patel to confirm whether his position today matches the wording from that earlier appearance. Patel listens, then responds with careful phrasing that mirrors the language but avoids repeating it exactly. Another lawmaker asks whether he can confirm or deny receiving particular internal communications related to document review. Patel answers by describing how communications are routed and documented within the Bureau, explaining the system rather than addressing the example directly. The distinction is subtle but noticeable. Pens resume moving as senators track not just what is said, but what is carefully left unsaid. A follow-up question arrives almost immediately, requesting a simple confirmation. Patel pauses, nods slightly, and offers a response that remains technically accurate without settling the underlying point. The exchange is polite, but the pattern has become unmistakable. Direct questions are met with answers that redirect toward process. What builds in the room is a quiet tension driven by absence. No raised voices, no objections, only a growing awareness that clarity is being approached from the edges without ever reaching the center. Lawmakers continue pressing, their tone unchanged, yet the gap between question and answer becomes the defining feature of the moment unfolding before the committee. The committee does not introduce new topics. Instead, members return to earlier exchanges, revisiting statements Patel has already given and placing them side by side with the questions he has just answered. A senator reads back a phrase from minutes earlier and asks whether it should be understood the same way in this context. Patel nods, then offers a clarification that slightly narrows the scope of what he previously said. The shift is small, almost imperceptible, yet it draws attention because of how carefully the words are chosen. Another lawmaker asks the same question in a different form, focusing on timing rather than content. Patel replies with similar language, again describing procedures and review steps instead of addressing the underlying concern directly. The repetition does not feel accidental. It creates a rhythm where each return to the subject tightens the space around his answers without adding any new information to the record. The atmosphere changes subtly. Staffers behind the dais stop whispering. Pens pause longer between notes. What fills the room is not confrontation but sustained scrutiny. Lawmakers are methodically testing whether the same answer holds under slightly altered framing. Patel remains composed, but his responses grow shorter, more technical, more carefully bounded. By circling the same point repeatedly, the committee raises the stakes without raising its voice. The pressure comes from persistence. Viewers can sense that the weight of the moment is being created by how many times the same uncertainty is allowed to remain unresolved before everyone present. As the exchange winds down, no single moment stands out as a confrontation, yet the cumulative effect of the questioning lingers. Senators look back over their notes, some flipping flipping pages to compare earlier remarks with what has just been said. One lawmaker summarizes a line of inquiry, not to accuse, but to place the sequence of answers into the record. Patel listens quietly, offering brief acknowledgments without expanding further. The chair thanks him for his responses and reminds the room that additional written questions may follow after the hearing concludes. That statement carries its own weight. It signals that what was discussed here is not finished, only paused. Members of the committee appear satisfied that their questions have been asked, even if the clarity they sought remains partially out of reach. Patel gathers his papers slowly, expression unchanged. The cameras remain fixed as the formal session moves toward adjournment. There is no dramatic closing statement, no declaration of resolution. Instead, the hearing ends the same way it began, with procedure guiding every step. What stays with the viewer is not a revelation, but a pattern. Careful questions, careful answers, and the noticeable space between them. Lawmakers asked directly about records, statements, and accountability. Patel responded within defined boundaries, never straying beyond them. The result is a record filled with words that feel complete, yet leave certain concerns hanging in place, waiting for clarification that never fully arrived during the session.